answer to the question we've all been asking, who will be Time's Person of the Year? Was this a hard decision or an easy decision this year?
It's always hard.
Every year we get to this point and there's a high degree of anticipation for Time making this announcement.
Time Magazine's Person of the Year has just been revealed, and that person is, drumroll please,
Time Person of the Year is the Ebola fighters who worked in West Africa with those infected with the virus.
Now, Time Magazine has declared the protester as Person of the Year.
In less than a year, Pope Francis has shaken up some of the images and public perception of the Catholic Church. Time Magazine selected him today.
Time Magazine has put the Silence Breakers on the cover.
I mean, I think it's pretty amazing.
I think that things will be different going forward. It's going to be a process.
We're going to go to some good news now. The Time Person of the Year is 16-year-old climate change activist Greta Thunberg.
Who will be Time's Person of the Year?
German Chancellor Angela Merkel,
Donald Trump.
The Guardians.
Who will be Time's Person of the Year is indeed the big question. I'm Ben Goldberger, Executive Editor of Time and Editorial Director of Person of the Year. Welcome back to another great edition of Time 100 Talks. Each year for more than 90 years, Time has chosen the person or group that has had the greatest influence on the year, for better or for worse. And tonight on NBC at 10 p.m. Eastern, we'll reveal who that person is for 2020, a year like none before it. Yet amid the tragedy and the triumph, people from all walks of life have stepped up in remarkable ways. Frontline workers risked and continue to risk their lives on our behalf. Protesters filled the streets demanding racial justice and police reform. Families took on the challenges of virtual education. And just a month ago, here in the United States, a presidential election made history, thanks to the work of people like Stacey Abrams, who helped flip Georgia blue. Ahead of tonight's NBC special, today's talks will host an amazing group of newsmakers who have each influenced 2020 in their own way. Joining us today is Congresswoman Ianna Pressley, members of the grassroots activist group Black Visions, Miski Noor, Candace Montgomery, and Artisha Ceballos, and National Domestic Workers Alliance Executive Director Ai-jen Poo, who will be joined by Bonnie Castillo, the Executive Director of National Nurses United. Plus, we'll be highlighting Time's 2020 Entertainer of the Year, BTS, and the first ever Kid of the Year, Gitanjali Rao. We have a great show, so let's kick things off with our first guest, Congresswoman Ianna Pressley. She'll be joined by my colleague Molly Ball to discuss her eventful year and how she plans to work with the incoming Biden-Harris administration.
Thank you for joining Time 100 Talks. I am Time's national political correspondent, Molly Ball, and I'm joined today by Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley, Democrat from Massachusetts. Congresswoman Pressley, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Good to be with you.
It's now been more than a month since the election was decided. Dust has settled a bit. What do you feel like we learned? What do you think the voters were trying to tell us in this year's election?
Well, you know, history is written by the winners. And the most marginalized, mobilized in a movement of Black, Brown, Indigenous, AAPI, disabled, and young people. And this movement of the most marginalized meant the moment and delivered a democratic victory that has made it possible for our democracy to breathe another day and for us to turn the page on this dark chapter in our history. And so, you know, that is the story for me, is the power of movements. And so now I think it is incumbent upon us to advance bold progressive policies that meet the needs of the most marginalized in this movement who delivered this democratic victory.
Well, as a progressive, how do you make sure the new administration hears progressive voices going forward? Are you concerned that the Biden-Harris administration will have too centrist an orientation?
Well, I'm in regular communication with the administration and with the transition, advocating for these bold progressive policies. And I think ultimately the reality is what we must recognize is that this movement of the most marginalized, many of them motivated by issue-based activism, like Medicare for All, like the Green New Deal, like racial injustice and addressing mass incarceration and police brutality and racial inequities writ large. That was issue-based activism. So these ideas are really populist. They are not a third rail or marginal. I think what people realize in the midst of this national reckoning on racial injustice, and certainly the pandemic has laid bare these persistent inequities and disparities and racial injustices and exacerbated them, that we must not only ensure that we have an equitable public health response and economic recovery from this pandemic, which has wrought unprecedented hurt, but then we need to make sure we're not recovering to where we were. We do not want to return to a pre-COVID status quo normal, because we know that that normal was insufficient, unjust, and inadequate to begin with. We need to recover, and then we need to enter into a third reconstruction. And so I'm going to continue to advocate for bold progressive policies that meet the scale and scope of the hurt and well position us for this third reconstruction. We certainly cannot return to a pre-COVID status quo normal. And that's not my appeal. That is the appeal of the masses.
Well, one of those movement-driven ideas, as I'm sure you're aware, the idea of defunding the police has come in for some criticism, including from some of your colleagues, blaming that idea, that slogan, for losses of House seats. Do you agree with that?
I think that when we fixate on language that has been driven by and defined by a movement, that we lose sight of what we should be focused on, and those are solutions. I don't want us to be so caught up in language that we forget what fueled that movement, and that is the consecutive murders of unarmed Black Americans and a mass incarceration system that has disproportionately impacted the most marginalized. You know, I wish people were as offended by that statement as they are defund education. That is something, defunding public education has happened for generations with disproportionate pain and burden for Black and Brown communities, creating an ecosystem whereby people could not thrive, could barely survive, and were often then thrust into survivalist behaviors that were then criminalized. This is why I've introduced my People's Justice Guarantee Resolution, a radical reimagining of our criminal legal system, which calls for the decriminalization of poverty, of homelessness, of substance use, of mental health, of low-level offenses. Molly, in the last decade, we have invested $1 billion federal in growing our school police, while every student does not have equitable access to a school nurse, a social worker, or a counselor. So I do believe the first responder has a role to play in society, but they need to play a role in every part of society, and they don't want to. We should not be dispatching police officers to the home of someone who is struggling with mental illness and in the midst of an episode. We should be deploying social workers. So, you know, ultimately, I just don't want us to, in this debate about language, to lose sight of what's most important. And that is that we respond with bold policies that root out these systemic harms that are not naturally occurring, they were legislated. And so it's incumbent upon us in this moment to meet the moment and to chart a new path.
Given how many of these concerns revolve around the criminal justice system, are you keeping a particular eye on who the new administration will select for Attorney General? And do you think maybe that ought to be a person of color?
Yes, I do. And I would like for it to be an African American. I'd like for it to be a Black person. You know, again, personnel is policy. And in order for us to advance bold progressive policies that meet the needs of the most marginalized, who delivered this victory for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, it's critical that we have people with full authority, who have been in proximity to the hurt, who bring lived experience, and will inform the policies that are shaped by this administration. So personnel is policy, and this cabinet must be one that is representative of the American people.
How do you think it looks so far?
You know, it's early, but I'm still advocating that in these top 4 or 5 positions, that we will see a greater representation of racial diversity, and that we will see more African Americans
So you feel like it's not there yet?
It is not there yet. But again, when we elected Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, that was about electing leaders that would be compassionate and not have contempt for the American people, leaders that would be thoughtful, and leaders that would be partners who would be accountable to us. And so I continue to push because I know that they expect me to. And they want to be challenged and they want to be held accountable to the promises that they made when they were running. But again, personnel is policy. So ultimately, this is certainly about more than just the symbolic impact of representation. This is about how when you have people around the table who bring a diversity of lived experience and perspective, how that then shows up in our policies. We've seen what happens when everyone around the table brings a completely monolithic and homogenized worldview informed by their lived experience. And so I want us to have a cabinet and an administration that is diverse, including African Americans and Latinos and Indigenous and AAPI and the disabled. I want us to have that diverse representation of LGBT, women, to have that diverse representation across the board.
Your so-called squad will have some company in the next Congress with the addition of some new progressive members. Democrats will also have a narrower House majority. How do you think that's going to change the dynamics of the House, particularly the House Democratic Caucus?
Again, I think, ultimately what our job is to be responsive to the needs of the people. And when you see this tsunami of hurt throughout the country, because of unprecedented food insecurity and unemployment and many people on the precipice of eviction, we must center the people in everything we do. The best advice that I received as a freshman in orientation was, in the process of legislating and governing, it is easy to forget the plot. We must never forget the plot, and the plot is the people. And so, to me, unity is not the goal, justice is the goal. And bipartisanship is a talking point. The goal is justice, and that is healthcare justice and housing justice and economic justice and climate justice. Again, I think we have been provided a bold mandate by the people who decisively elected Joe Biden and Kamala Harris to respond in kind with policies that, again, are populist, like paid family leave. If you're sick, you should be able to stay home from work and to be paid. If you need to be a caregiver or a caretaker to take care of a sick loved one, you should still be able to be compensated by your job. This is just about being decent and humane. The only thing that's radical about the Green New Deal and Medicare for All and paid family leave, or in fact, even my People's Justice Guarantee, is that we seek to get at the root of these systemic challenges. It's radical in that it is about fundamentally transforming our country and intentionally building a more equitable and just world.
As you mentioned, there's so much pain, there's so much insecurity out there. Yet Congress hasn't passed any COVID relief for many months. We're now hearing that there's some support for this new bipartisan proposal. What do you think of it? And do you think it has momentum behind it?
Well, look, the people that I represent and fight for every day, they're not guided by and certainly not asking me what's the bipartisan appetite or what does the latest poll say. What they're saying to me is, please fight for us and make sure that whatever happens, that it is something that is going to provide us with immediate relief. And so, what I'm advocating for is direct cash reoccurring payments for the American people, the cancellation of rent and mortgage, eviction and foreclosure moratorium, extended and expanded unemployment benefits, worker protections, and of course, massive federal investment in state and municipal aid. Let me share a story with you. I have a constituent who is receiving $111 a month in unemployment. She has 3 kids. Her rent is $1,900 a month. She has depleted her savings and has $35 to her name. People need direct cash relief on a reoccurring basis. And when I ask them, how will you use that money? They say to buy diapers. They say to buy an inhaler. They say to buy insulin. They say to buy groceries or to keep a roof over their head. We are in the midst of a pandemic. And so we have to provide at least the most basic needs for people. And certainly keeping people housed is critical to that. In my district alone, some of the projections are that we could see 60,000 to 100,000 families unhoused in the middle of a pandemic. So our response must be one that gets direct relief to the American people and that is bold. And in fact, the Fed has encouraged us and empowered us to do that very thing, which is not something that comes often from them. They have said, be bold in this relief. And so we must be bold. We must advance policies that meet the scale and scope of this hurt and are as impactful and run as deep as the hurt runs. And right now, the American people are experiencing a tsunami of hurt.
Well, what do you say to your constituents when they ask you, you're a member of Congress, why can't you people get this done?
Well, I can't say, my constituents know how hard I'm fighting for them. They see what I'm doing. So they know that I listen to them, that I remain in proximity to their hurt, that I proactively engage them to make sure that I'm bringing their stories, their lived experiences, their pain into every room that I'm in. So I can't say that I've been asked that question very often. More of the conversations that I have in community are, please just send help. And the most reoccurring, the most constant refrain, the top 3 calls that my office receives are for direct cash assistance, for housing assistance, and for groceries, and also for diapers. I mean, so the American people are just crying out to us for the most basic of needs in order for them to stay safe, to stay healthy, to stop the spread of this virus. And so I'm clear-eyed on what my advocacy must be, because it is directly informed by the people who sent me to Washington. And again, ultimately, unity is not the goal. The goal is justice. And that's what I'm going to continue to fight for.
What, in your view, has been the reason that Congress hasn't gotten something done to this point?
Well, to be clear, this Democratic majority-led House has passed some bipartisan relief bills that did meet the scale and scope of the hurt. But this Senate has obstructed that progress, carrying the water for this calloused and corrupt Trump administration. This Senate has stood in the way of us passing a comprehensive COVID relief package to meet the scale and scope of the hurt, while instead approving 222 federal far-right leaning judges. So this Senate has obstructed that progress. They're the ones that are callous and disconnected and removed from the hurt the American people, the American worker is experiencing when they decide to fight for corporate liability shields and then slap a relief bill a name on it. It doesn't change the reality, and that is that they are more focused on bailing out corporations than they are the American people and the American worker. When I talk to workers, what they say is that I don't want to sue my employer. I just want to survive. I had a conversation with workers in my district who work in hospitality at hotels and at the airport. They're still paying for their own PPE. So this Senate has been obstructionist in every way. They're why we were not able to make change on the Voting Rights Act, to vote on the Emmett Till anti-lynching bill, why we were unable to move on an infrastructure bill or a bill to reduce the cost of prescription drugs. That's why I'm doing everything in my power now to ensure that we do regain control of the Senate to stop this obstruction in meeting the needs of the American people.
Looking back, you're about to take office for your second term in Congress. What do you feel like you learned from your first term? What would you tell freshman Congresswoman Pressley if you could go back in time?
Oh my goodness. I mean, look, in the last 2 years, our entire country has changed. Not anything that I could have predicted that within days of my taking my seat in Congress, that we would be in the midst of a federal government shutdown. That a year to the date of that I would have been voting in the affirmative on articles of impeachment, that weeks thereafter that we might have been on the precipice of war, and weeks after that in the midst of a global pandemic. What I would tell myself is to continue to listen to the people and to continue to be bold. Do not, moderate, stifle, shelve, or shrink, because these inequities and disparities are so deeply embedded. They have been codified in law for generations. I do believe that if we can legislate hurt and harm, that we can also legislate healing and justice, that we can legislate equity. And in the midst of this national reckoning on racial injustice, again, something else that I could not have predicted, we have a mandate from the people that we do exactly that. And so I'm looking forward to the 117th Congress so that I can do the work of legislating. I'm very proud that I'm, one of the top freshmen in terms of the introduction of bills in the 116th Congress. And that is because I went to Washington to legislate. Policy is my love language. I represent a district that is diverse, vibrant, and dynamic, and also one of the most unequal in the country, where in a 3-mile radius, life expectancy drops by 30 years and median household income by $50,000. Again, these inequities are not naturally occurring, they were legislated. And so the path forward is for us to disrupt and to change this legacy and these poor outcomes. And so I'm looking forward to leading on intersectional legislation that meets the scale and scope of the hurt, that ensures that we recover from this pandemic, but then that we enter into a third reconstruction, and that we advance policy that legislates equity and justice in the way that we have for generations enacted policy that has legislated hurt and harm.
There's such a mix of darkness and hope as we go into this winter, right? I mean, the pandemic seems like it's worse than ever, and yet we have this promise of a vaccine on the horizon. How hopeful are you that there are better days ahead?
Oh, well, I'm an eternal optimist. If I didn't believe in the capacity of people or of our country or the promise of democracy, I certainly wouldn't do the work that I've been doing really since I was 10 years old, in electoral politics and in movement building. I'm very hopeful because in the midst of this unprecedented hurt, what we have seen is unprecedented demonstrations of community, unprecedented demonstrations of solidarity, unprecedented mobilization efforts, and that speaks to the strength and the power of community, the collective care, the mutual aid that has emerged in response to this pandemic has been inspired. Time and again, neighbors have looked out for one another, have stood in the gap in the midst of a federal administration and a GOP-led Senate that has abandoned them. And so I will always have hope because I'm guided by the people.
Congresswoman Pressley, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Molly.
You're watching Time 100 Talks. I'm Ben Goldberger, Time's executive editor and editorial director of Person of the Year. All show long, we're reflecting on this extraordinary year with people who've played a key role in shaping it. That includes our next guests, Miski Noor, Candace Montgomery, and Artisha Ceballos, members of the activist group Black Visions. They'll be joined by my colleague Haley Sweetland-Edwards to discuss the significance of this year's fight for racial justice, the work that has been done, and the work that remains. But before we speak with them, let's take a quick look at Time's 2020 Entertainer of the Year, K-pop sensation BTS. The fight for racial justice was a global movement. At the height of the social unrest, BTS donated $1 million to the Black Lives Matter movement and tweeted this statement in solidarity. Quote, "We stand against racial discrimination. We condemn violence. You, I, and we all have the right to be respected. We will stand together. Black Lives Matter." Here is BTS.
Was quite a bit more special for us because we had the best news and the worst news. The worst news is, of course, the pandemic and the tour cancellation. The best news was, of course, we had the #1 on Billboard.
Dynamite, 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 dynamite.
Dynamite, their first all-English speaking song debuting at #1 on the Billboard Hot 100.
올해 우리에게 희망을 주고 행복을 줬던 것은 온라인 콘서트 팬이었고요. 그리고 멤버였고요. 또 다 같이 이렇게 노래 만들고 춤추고 연습하고 이런 원래 우리가 하던 일상들이 다시 행복이고 희망이었던 것 같아요.
사실 뭐 저희의 존재의 이유가 뭐 많은 분들이 저희의 음악을 들어주시기 때문에 존재하는 거고
저희는 진짜 밑바닥에서부터 쭉쭉쭉 천천히 이게 올라왔는데 그치. 같이 뭔가 동반 성장한 그런 느낌이라서 서로 뭔가 그 깊은 마음을 아는 것 같아요.
미국에서도 사실 아미 때문에 저희가 사실 떴다고 보거든요.
그렇죠.
As K-pop is becoming bigger, we should have some debate. What is K-pop? For our Dynamite, we sang the whole lyrics for the first time in English, and that hit the #1. So some might say that this is not K-pop because you guys all sing in English. But what's K-pop? You just don't want to like limit this music or our heart to this boundary called K-pop.
계속해서 뭔가 이 한국 문화가 발전해 나아가고 있다는 거에 대해서는 일단은 굉장히 긍정적인 생각을 가지고 있고요. 사실 그런 부분에 대해서 앞으로도 뭔가 더 발전이 되고 더 나아갈 수가 있다면은 저희가 할 수 있는 부분에서 뭐 음악이든 뭐 퍼포먼스든 최선을 다해서 좋은 모습 보여드리는 게 사실 그게 좋을 것 같아요.
비틀즈라는 그룹과 이제 비교를 된다는 것 자체가 너무 영광스럽고 너무 기쁜 말인 것 같아요. 저희는 뭔가 다른 점이 있다면 저희는 7명이고요.
나 그 얘기 하려고 그랬는데.
저희는 춤도 추고 노래도 하고 그리고 예능도 하고 뭐 이런 우리의 좀 케미도 많이 보여주면서 여러 방면으로 이제 삶을 살아가고 있습니다. Life goes on.
I think that's just a kind of like a cliche for after the Beatles, and we're just some boys from Korea who love music and performance. That's it.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Haley Sweetland Edwards, a senior editor here at Time. I'm joined today by Miski Noor, Candace Montgomery, and Artisha Ceballos of Black Visions, a Minnesota-based collective of activists and organizers who were instrumental in igniting the demonstrations for justice and equality that began this summer in Minneapolis and spread throughout the country. Thank you all for being with us today. Candace, let's begin with you. Why do you think it was that the protests in Minneapolis turned into the sustained national movement that we saw this year? What was different about this moment?
Thanks for that question, Haley. I'm glad to be here. I think that what felt uniquely different about this moment was one, that all of this was happening in a city that had had multiple tragedies in the last several years, overlaid on top of a pandemic. That folks are really at their wits' end and are in the place where they have the unfortunately, the capacity to be able to show up in the streets and to stay really active because of the impacts of the pandemic and just people really feeling what is at stake in a very in a deeper systematic way. Mm-hmm. And then two, our work is really building off of from 2018 when we began the call to defund the Minneapolis Police Department, and unique to like other moments. We had a really concrete, popular demand that people were able to grab onto and apply to their city, their state, their local context, their country even, right? That, was not just a symbolic demand, but was something that actually could be implemented through structural change.
Artisha, you've been an integral part of Black Visions since its founding. What was it like to see these protests that began, at home in your neighborhood, reach the rest of the country?
For me, it was like very exciting and also really intense and kind of scary, and not necessarily the protest happening, but like the moment of everybody being polarized and knowing that like we are not turning back. And things will only progress further as like conditions for people here in our country and all over the world especially, but here get worse. Like, it's only going to get more intense. And as Candace is saying, like, having the pandemic also be a force that gave people a lot of space to even have the time to come out. Because one thing that is very important to me to know is that people have felt these ways and just never actually had the time to express that they feel these ways when you're always trying to survive, and actually having your whole community be out there and want to be connected and fight together. So it was really impactful and beautiful to see years of work and decades of work built upon each other come to a head. Yeah.
Yeah, there's, it's just the beginning of what will be a long movement, it looks like, from a historical perspective. But Miski, what signs of progress are you seeing already on policing, and what leaders are you seeing emerge nationally as change agents?
Yeah, thank you for that. I think, honestly, what has felt like hopeful or inspiring has been the people, right? Like, our communities have stayed engaged and continue to stay engaged, even when the media stops paying attention, even when the public isn't necessarily resonating with our demands. It's our community who stays in it, who are talking to one another, pushing each other's understanding of what safety could look like in our city, and really are just like digging into deep engagement with one another to really do the work to build a collective vision around safety in our city. So that's felt really exciting. We are moving forward with engaging our community members around this vision around a people's agenda, right? What does it mean for the people to put forward a collective vision after digging into conversations, not just once or for 1 month or for one summer, right? But for an entire year. And what does it mean for folks to build buy-in into that? I think that the way that the conversation around abolition and defunding the police spread all across not only this country, but the world, there's just so much space. Like, there was a rupture and there's so much space for possibility and transformation. And so what does it mean for us to walk with our people inside of that, inside of this greater understanding that's been created to develop even more possibility? And yeah, so that's what I feel most inspired by moving into 2021.
Miski mentioned the defund the police phrase, which has been criticized from across the ideological aisle, but from Barack Obama and Congressman James Clyburn, and on the understanding that it is alienating. People are using that language, and it would alienate people who would otherwise be behind the movement. Knowing what you know now, would you still use that phrase?
Yes, because defunding the police is exactly where we are asking for. And I think the detail is that there's a plan behind that. And the assumption is that there is no plan, and that defunding the police means taking away all forms of safety from people here, and not understanding that we are what keep each other safe. Our communities keep us safe. And one thing that I heard that was really powerful in our budget hearing that we just had last week in Minneapolis, someone in our community had spoken and said, the police don't prevent violence, they literally show up after violence is already happening. And so many instances of people needing help and the police not coming to their aid while seeing it happen. So no, I don't regret us moving with the call to defund the police. And we were already moving with that call before this moment in May. And I think for me, it's a challenge of the English language as well. Our language is really based on business and transactions and things like that, and not necessarily depth. And we often see words for what they are and do not know that they have more meaning than that. So I'd much rather, I'm okay with giving people bold statements that also have a plan versus fantasy empty statements that lead people to nowhere, really.
Miski, since you originally brought it up, I wanted to hear your thoughts on it as well. Obama just said, in critiquing the phrase defund the police, which began as abolish the police in many places, he said, do you want to actually get something done, or do you want to feel good among the people you already agree with? So he set it up as sort of a pragmatic question. Does that ring true to you at all?
I don't know. I have a lot of feelings about this. I think that, yeah, the left is often like fed this line around being pragmatic, right? Around go for what you actually think you can get, which has always resulted in crumbs for our communities. And so I think it's really disingenuous that Mr. Hope and Change himself is talking about snappy slogans when, a demand like defund the police actually brings people into a bold vision, like Artisha was saying, actually invites them in to help frame something more different. Adrienne Marie Brown says that one of the worst things that capitalism does is that it steals our imagination from us. And so it's actually about inviting people into their imagination, holding the fear that comes up. Of course, people are scared of what no police could look like. Of course, it means a transition. I don't think even the most radical of us expect for there to be, a light switch flipped and 24 hours later to be no police in the streets, right? It's about a transition, and it's about engaging our people in that vision to be the stewards of that vision, to make it actually real and possible. And so, yeah, no regret around defund the police. It's a demand that went across the world that has engaged and ignited the imaginations of thousands and millions of people, and has actually brought more people into our movements. And now we can have conversations about the nuances of defunding and decriminalization and harm reduction, all as a way towards abolition. And so it's an invitation. And I don't think that there should be any regret inside of that.
So speaking of transition, we're in a transitional moment in the U.S. administration. Candace, is there a change or reform that you really hope President-elect Joe Biden will embrace sort of immediately when he enters office or within the first few months?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is the Breathe Act that is coming out of the Movement for Black Lives National Network, which is really calling for a robust policy plan that really gets at the violence of policing, and moves beyond that to really being able to invest and support our communities. That's one thing that I think he absolutely can get behind. The other thing I would say is that what he needs to get behind or move away from is any type of approach that, is solely rooted in compromise at the willingness of the genocide of Black people, and the willingness to continue to invest literally trillions of dollars into the military and police that across the globe, not just here in the US, are being utilized to marginalize and sanction and kill Black people and communities of color. I think that his sort of like modern or centrist approach oftentimes is willing to make some of those compromises for a false sense of safety through policing.
And on the local level, we've seen efforts, of course, from the City Council of Minneapolis, which were made possible and pushed for by the city's activist community, by you and your community. Artisha, I wanted to know what advice you have for other local activists who are looking to push for similar changes in their own communities.
My advice is to be connected and be in community and have real conversations. To not just use words like transparency and accountability, but to be honest with each other, to have kinship and understand that regardless of if you like each other or not, these are the people you want to be liberated with, or these are the people who you see deserve the benefits of this work that we are all doing together. And so don't forget about yourself, and don't see yourself and your community and your comrades outside of that lens. I think it's a very important time for all of us across this country to be more connected and understand that, like, individualism is a symptom, is a byproduct of capitalism, and capitalism is the overarching thing that is killing all of us in this country, no matter how it plays. So yeah, that's what I would say.
We have to wrap up this discussion in just a minute, but I do want to end on a maybe resolute note, which is that looking forward, how do you stay hopeful? What gives you hope about the next year? Miski, let's start with you.
What gives me hope for the next year? Honestly, I think the love, joy, pleasure, and connection that I've seen community actually be able to cultivate. I don't think anybody saw 2020 coming. And to be in a pandemic and then to have an uprising spark in our city, and then everything that went down with this last election, and to be on the brink of an economic who knows what. And to see how people have still just shown up for one another, and dug in and helped to support each other's needs, help to keep the city running when the elected leadership actually wasn't able to do that. Just gives me so much hope for what's possible. And these moments, we have kept building for years and are going to continue to, and it's just incredible the amount of folks who've come in and who've stayed in, and all the possibility that means that really actually exists for our people and exists for our cities, and the stories that we get to tell because of that.
Candace, what about you? What can you take from the dumpster fire of 2020 that gives you hope in 2021?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, the saying like ignorance is bliss is a real thing. And the experience between the uprisings and the pandemic have forced people to not be able to be ignorant to their experiences, to the ways that systems in our society are really set up against most of us, right? And I think that, that gives me a lot of hope, because then people are then clear about what they're fighting against and for, and that they need to fight. Change only happens when the masses engage in it, and not all of us have to, believe 100% in abolition right now, or we can struggle about what the process to defunding the police looks like. But the fact that I think the majority of our community and really globally our society is, looking much more critically at the way things are set up, the way things are rigged, so to speak, and then looking at those systems and changing those systems as solutions, rather than what we have done for too long, which is just see it as like a few bad apples, right? Whether that be in policing or whether that be in the racist interactions that we have, people are looking and saying, hey, the police are the people who come and evict me when I lost my job and couldn't pay my rent anymore. There's something deeply interconnected and deeply wrong about that. And that like my tax dollars go towards that process instead of a process that supports me in ensuring that me and my family have a home. That is what makes me really hopeful. And ultimately that we are actually on a path forward to transitioning away from, in Minneapolis, our police department, and I think in many cities, are actually on a real and realistic path to doing that in my lifetime. And quite frankly, when I started 2020, especially after the pandemic, I did not think that that was going to be something that I would live to see. I knew that my life's work would be around dismantling the prison and police industrial complex. But never thought that the children that I bear or the folks that come after me and myself will actually be able to see the fruits of that labor. And so that makes me deeply hopeful.
And Artisha, I'll give you the last word here. Just a quick thought on what gives you hope into this next year.
Yeah, what gives me hope into this next year are children, the kids, the youth, the young people, those who are doing their K through 12 schooling online right now. They are the ones who definitely give me hope, and the babies that are born today, because our time is already evading us. And it is those new people who will give us more hope results.
Well, thank you so much, Candace, Miski, and Artisha, for joining Time. It was a pleasure speaking with you guys.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Welcome back to Time 100 Talks. I'm Ben Goldberger, Time Executive Editor and Editorial Director of Person of the Year. Speaking of Person of the Year, we'll announce who that is tonight on NBC at 10 p.m. Eastern. Please do tune in and watch. Throughout the show, our guests have reflected on the challenges of this year and how we can try to rebuild a world that is more just, more equitable, and more resilient than before. And there is no greater challenge this year than the pandemic. Though recent weeks have brought promising advances in vaccines, cases continue to soar, and many hospitals and healthcare workers are at the brink. Before we speak to our next guests, Ai-jen Poo and Bonnie Castillo, about what another devastating wave will do to our frontline workers, let's take a quick look at Time's first ever Kid of the Year, Gitanjali Rao. Just 15, she has already made significant contributions to the STEM field, and if she's shaping the future of science, we're in very good hands. Here's the first ever Kid of the Year, Gitanjali Rao.
I'm a very curious person, if that's one thing you need to know about me. I love learning about the environment, ecology. Everything is just of such interest to me. I just like learning in general, so everything in school is actually super fun. I cannot see a world filled with kindness without science and technology being involved.
Good, everybody's gone. Now we can talk. Where are you right now?
I'm in Denver, Colorado.
Well, congratulations to the first ever Kid of the Year. You have a brilliant mind, clearly, but you are very, very generous with that mind and information, and that's just really wonderful.
What is the invention?
So I created a device called Tethys.
Each and every one of us have the right to know what is in our water and have access to clean drinking water. And this fully functional device can help with that.
Tethys is a device that detects lead in drinking water faster and more inexpensive than the current methods out there today. It's based on carbon nanotube sensor technology and provides all the results to your mobile phone on an app that I created. My inspiration behind it was actually the Flint water crisis. It was just so unacceptable that kids my age were essentially drinking a poison every day. And I realized that something really needed to be done to help solve that problem. I don't think I can say there was like an aha moment where I was like, this is what I want to do. It was rather just like this continuous like learning and loving more about STEM and science and technology. But I can tell you a huge changing moment in my life was about, I want to say when I was 4 or 5 years old, my uncle got me a chemistry kit, and I felt the need to finish the whole thing in one day, and I did. A lot of my devices are based on biology, chemistry, physics, computational method. This process, it's usually spread over a couple of months, even years. It's just based on how I feel about it and how I get inspired by something. I don't force myself through the process. I don't do anything to accelerate it. I do it at a pace which makes me feel excited and makes me want to keep going. See, that's the biggest thing about innovation is if you don't have that motivation and drive to keep going, it's gonna be dry. It's not gonna be something you enjoy doing or anybody else is going to enjoy hearing about. 2020 has really helped me be a kid. Obviously, I do need fresh air, so I go on bike rides a lot. I fence. I did a lot of virtual fencing. I fenced a lot of pillows. I baked a lot, an insane amount. Calligraphy is now a thing I do. Our family is a huge world traveling family. I've been to a lot of countries. I want to say about 14. Where I want to go. I know we're not gonna go here anytime soon, but Madagascar. It's such a cool place. I'm just obsessed with animals and free, wild, roaming things. The dinosaurs are probably my favorite animal, hands down. There's so many of them, and they're so cool. If someone figures out how to make dinosaurs come back to life, please call me or email me. I can tell you a couple lasting words that stayed with me. Miss Stockdale, who was my teacher when I was in 2nd grade. The first time she met me, she told me that I was going to change the world. I've been wanting to change the world, and hopefully I am changing the world.
Hi, I'm Emma Barker-Bonimo, Senior Editor at Time, and I'm joined today by Bonnie Castillo, the head of National Nurses United, and Ai-jen Poo, the director of the National Domestic Workers Alliance. Welcome.
Thanks so much for having us. Thank you so much.
So Time readers just voted essential workers as the winners of the 2020 Person of the Year reader poll. It's clear that we as a society really appreciate essential workers, but there can be a gap between that appreciation and real action. What is the reality that you see frontline workers that you work with facing on a daily basis?
Sure. I mean, I think for nurses, we here we are 9 months into this, and we are still working without the essential supplies that we need, the staffing, the PPE. And I think what is most bothersome is, having been betrayed by our employers and government. And so that for us is produced a great deal of moral distress. And, this didn't have to be this way. And we know what we need. And so for us, I think that is the most challenging. And right now, as we go into this surge, it is only going to get worse. And we are, as you said, an essential workforce, predominantly women workforce, domestic workers, nurses, and yet we're so devalued. This work has been historically devalued, and at this moment, this pandemic has just amplified that. So for us, we have to speak out, and we are going to speak out. We're not going to be silent, and we understand our role as union nurses, that we have a protected voice to speak out. So that's what we're doing.
Yes, and I'll just build off of that by saying that, I think essential workers need the same things that all of us need, the ability to keep themselves safe and take care of their families. And as Bonnie said, we're 9 months into the pandemic, and many essential workers are risking their lives, their safety every day, and their kids are home from school. They don't have childcare. They don't have adequate wages. They don't have any hazard pay. Many don't have health care, even as they're keeping us healthy. And they don't have paid sick days or paid time off if they do start to feel sick or unwell. And what we're finding is that oftentimes in many workplaces, many essential workplaces, the burden of safety is being put on the workers with the least amount of resources and power to navigate the situation. So you have home care workers who are having to pay out of pocket for regular COVID tests, for PPE, and for safer modes of transportation to get to and from work. And it's just a really impossible situation. So I would say that it is incredible that we are recognizing the work of essential workers for the first time in many instances, right? Many of these jobs were really invisible to us before. We're now seeing it, and we can't unsee it. And we have to do more to ensure that our essential workers have the protections they need to keep themselves safe. And that's everything from hazard pay to healthcare and childcare, and also a voice, a seat at the table as cities and states think about what it looks like to reopen and rebuild, to really draw on the experience of essential workers and get their perspectives, their point of view, their ideas for how to reopen in a way that is safe, not just for consumers, but for the workers who are going to have to really ensure all of our collective safety.
So a lot of these problems and potential solutions seem really big to the average person. What can people who are not essential workers, but also, aren't in charge of big government decisions do to help support these workers?
Well, as nurses with our patients, I mean, we enjoy a great deal of support from our patients and the community, and we are advocating for them to stay home, to wear masks, to engage in robust hygiene, and that's a real concrete way of how to help us. And we've seen that there have been a lot of corporate interest pushing to reopen too soon. We warned against that. We know that there's big pushes to reopen the schools, which will, we understand the danger of asymptomatic transmission and how deadly that is. And so, we've been out there being a vocal force, and I think that the biggest challenge is the misinformation and the fact that the highest level of leadership in this country has actually, entertained the idea that this somehow will just go away or that it's a hoax. That's what we're up against. And so we're hopeful with the new administration that we'll actually have assistance, a partner, and that we'll actually be able to conduct policy by science. That's simply what we're asking. Everything that drives our practice as nurses involves science, and we need to get back to that. And so that's really, I think for us, that's how the public can help and to engage in, as they did in this last election.
I would just add that it's really important that our members of Congress and all of our elected officials hear from us, that we want essential workers to have protections. There is a framework for an Essential Workers Bill of Rights that Senator Warren and Representative Khanna have championed in Congress. And there will be immediately conversations about COVID relief and economic recovery. And our members of Congress need to hear from us that we want to make sure that essential workers have protections, that they have the relief that they deserve. And we want to make sure that they have the care that they deserve, the ability to take care of their families. And all of that is going to be on the table in live conversation in Congress as soon as it reopens in the new year. And so all of us as voters, as concerned community members, have a huge role to play in ensuring that essential workers are protected.
Frontline workers are some of the most at risk, both in terms of health, but also because many of them are low-wage workers economically. There's this sort of push and pull between reopening businesses to restart the economy and shutting down businesses to stop the virus. What do you think is the correct balance in order to protect your workers and also protect their livelihoods?
Well, without a doubt, those essential workers need maximum support, and that means other social services types of support as well, including paid time off and unemployment, maximum unemployment being, right now we have to pay people to stay home. We have to. Science will dictate where the virus goes. We will not get a choice in terms of how it spreads. That means that we have to make decisions based on human need and care, which is what essential workers are giving, versus protecting the bottom line. Now, without a doubt, we want our economy to be healthy again, but part of being healthy again is protect those essential workers and protect workers and families during this time. Imagine if we would have done that and started that 9 months ago. The reality would be so much different in terms of what we're facing today. So now is not the time to double down on what has not worked. This has not worked. Reopening didn't work. Now is the time to get it right. And it takes bold leadership, without a doubt, and takes bold public policy that is focused on the public good. We have to do that. There's no way around it.
Aijen, the workers that you represent in domestic work maybe are slightly more affected by the economic shutdown. What's your perspective?
Well, domestic work, it's true. It's a full-blown depression, economic depression for domestic workers right now. At the beginning of the pandemic, we saw 90% of our workforce lose jobs and income. And over time, it has improved somewhat, but we're still at a 40% unemployment rate right now for domestic workers. And the levels of food insecurity and housing insecurity are literally like nothing I ever could have imagined in my worst nightmare. And so we do need relief, and we do need to recover economically. But I do believe that we have to do so in a way that is responsible and that takes care of the people who've taken care of us this whole time. And one thing that is a kind of a simple measure or step that can be taken is to ensure that essential workers and frontline workers like domestic workers are a part of the process of deciding how and when we reopen. So there's some places like Harris County in Texas that have essential worker boards that have brought workers from different essential industries together to be a part of the conversation about how and when reopening happens, so that their perspectives can be a part of the strategy. And I think increasingly we have to draw on the experience and the insight and the wisdom of our essential workers in terms of thinking about what it looks like to recover safely and also equitably. This is our moment as we reimagine what it looks like to recover. This is our moment to really address those issues, and it will disproportionately affect women of color, like domestic workers, who've been systematically left behind from our protections and our economic policy in the past. So this is a huge opportunity here. I know we are in dire straits and we're dealing with a raging pandemic, and I believe that on the other side of this, if we design our recovery right, we can actually get to a more equitable, more sustainable economy for the 21st century.
The Biden administration just announced its team of medical advisors, and Melinda Gates also recently called for Biden to appoint a czar for caregiving specifically. Are either of you working with the incoming administration on new policies that could help essential and frontline workers?
Yes, already President-elect has actually been meeting with workers, including healthcare workers, and listening. So, we have been at the table already, and that is without a doubt, it's critical. And we have submitted extensive comments and analysis based on our experience and what is needed. And the things that are needed are actually, we can do them pretty quickly. Invoke the Defense Production Act to mass produce the PPE that will protect all of the essential workers. That is so critical. If we, and we have the ability to do that, to actually have an OSHA standard that is like a temporary infectious disease standard, that too would protect workers, all workers. And so we are looking forward to working with this administration, and already they're listening to us. So we're hopeful.
Exactly. The Biden-Harris campaign, before they were elected, now our president and vice president-elect had a plan that was a part of their economic recovery agenda called the 21st Century Caregiving Plan. And it was a plan to invest in childcare, home care, and paid leave, basically what working families need in order to take care of their loved ones from across the lifespan, from children to older adults and people with disabilities. And it is a really transformative vision. We in this country have never really invested in our care economy as fundamental infrastructure for our economy to function. But really, what could be more fundamental than our ability to care for our families while we're working? And so this notion that we need to invest in our care economy as if it's infrastructure, as a fundamental first step to getting our economy back up and running, getting America back to work, it's critical. That's what I'm really excited to work with the new administration on moving forward. And I love Melinda Gates's idea about having a care czar, or somebody who's really leading and championing this effort within the administration, because it will require participation and engagement across many agencies. I mean, I feel there is momentum to address some of these big challenges that we faced for a long time, and to do so with courage and to meet the level of crisis that families are facing right now.
What gives you both hope for the future in such a difficult year?
I would say the workforce itself, which is essential, is not replaceable, will never be automated. Is so strong. Just today, you know, during this pandemic, we all have our personal lives, and our families get sick. And I have to say, I'm dealing with right now with my brother, who's terminally ill and is being cared for by a nurse who has her own healthcare insecurity about coming to work and not having adequate PPE and going and being afraid to go home and infect her families. Yet her focus has been the care and dignity of my brother. And I just think, wow, who does that? That to me is a fierce warrior. And I'm so proud to be fighting by their side, because I know that we can win.
The fact that so many of us are recognizing the incredible courage of nurses like the one that Bonnie just named, the fact that we are recognizing essential workers as People of the Year, and that we're willing to do more than applaud and recognize them, but actually begin to make the changes and take action that will change the material conditions of their lives to keep them safe. That is what gives me hope. We have momentum now, and we can't unsee the things that we've seen in this pandemic. And I believe that the good people of this country will move the kind of change that we need to see for essential workers forward.
Well, thank you so much to both of you for joining us today and giving us such great insights.
Thank you to all of today's guests and our Time contributors. I'd also like to thank everyone for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed today's program. And don't forget to watch our broadcast special tonight on NBC at 10 p.m. Eastern as we reveal. We'll be back next Tuesday for an all-new episode of Time 100 Talks, when we'll convene more extraordinary leaders to spotlight solutions and encourage action toward a better world. We hope to see you then.